SS610, using the work of internal auditors. Definition and scope of internal audit. In internal audit function, we evaluate or examine three areas. First one, governance of entity, how they are managed. Second, risk management. Third, internal control systems, so that we can give assurance and also suggest improvements. Scope of internal audit function, activities related to governance. Internal auditor may be required to evaluate performance management and accountability with which employee work to achieve performance, compliance with ethics and values while running organization, appropriate communication with respect to communication of risk and related control information to appropriate areas or department, communication between those charged with the governance, management, external auditors, internal auditor, risk management, assist entity to identify areas where there is significant exposure to risk and thereby improving risk management system of entity and improving internal controls to compensate those risks. They also help entity in assessing fraud risk and detecting risk. Next, internal control. Review of compliance of law and regulation. Internal auditor may be required to review requirements of law, regulation, and rules. Internal auditor required to evaluate management policies and directives given for compliance with these laws. Review actual compliance of laws, regulations, and rules. Evaluation of internal controls. Internal auditor may be required to review controls, whether they are adequately designed, evaluating their operations, are they implemented properly, recommending improvements thereon. Internal auditor may be required to provide assurance regarding design, implementation, and operating effectiveness. Examination of financial and operating information. Internal auditor may be required to review how system identify, recognize, measure, classify, record, summarize, and report financial and operating information. After reviewing the system, internal auditor may go and examine transactions and balances. A review of operating activities. Internal auditor may be assigned with a work to review economy, efficiency, and effectiveness of operating activities, including non-financial activities. Internal audit and external audit. Difference between internal audit and external audit. In internal audit, we evaluate three areas: governance of entity risk management, internal control system, so that we can give assurance and also suggest improvements. External audit, systematic independent examination of financial records with ultimate objective is to give opinion on financial statements, whether they give true and fair view or not. Internal audit is voluntary nature. It may be compulsory to some companies under Section 138, whereas external audit is compulsory to companies, banks, insurance companies, trust, etc. Who can be an internal auditor? Either a CA, CWA, such other professionals may or may not be in practice. Internal auditor can be employees also. Whereas for external auditor, qualifications and disqualifications are given in Companies Act. Only CA in practice can do external audit. Next, appointment. Internal auditor is appointed by audit committee or board of directors, as the case may be, whereas external auditor is generally appointed by shareholders. Internal auditor is management oriented, whereas external auditor is oriented to the needs of the users of financial statements and management. Internal auditor scope of work is as determined between management and internal auditor, whereas external auditor scope of work depends upon the law, standards on auditing, terms of engagement. Is there any internal audit format? There is no specific format. Guidelines given in SIA 4, whereas external auditor format is prescribed under SA 700. Internal audit report will be submitted to the management, whereas external audit report will be submitted to the shareholders. Next, SS610 explains that statutory auditor can take help of internal audit function in following two ways. First one, using work of internal auditor. Second one, taking direct assistance. First one, using work of internal auditor. Statutory auditor refers the work performed by the internal auditor as per the instructions given by the management. There are three steps. Step one, evaluating internal audit function, whether we can use his work. Step number two, determining which work of internal auditor should be used. Step number three, using the work of internal audit function. Next, taking direct assistance. Statutory auditor appoints internal auditor as a separate assignment to help him in doing statutory audit and work as a team member. In such a case, there are three steps. Step one, evaluating internal audit function for the purpose of taking direct assistance. Step number two, determining which work can be assigned to internal auditor. Step number three, taking direct assistance from internal auditor. Using work of internal auditor. Step number one, evaluating internal audit function, whether we can use its work. Following factors should be evaluated for this purpose. Whether we can use the work of an internal auditor. First one, level of competence. Second, evaluate objectivity of internal auditor for this purpose. Third, check systematic and disciplined approach, including quality control system, organizational status and policies and procedures relating to internal audit function, that is authority, restriction, conflict of interest, etc. In the following situation, we should not use work of internal audit function. First one, lack of sufficient competence. Second, organizational status, policies and procedures relating to internal audit function, not adequately supporting the objectivity. Third, does not apply systematic and disciplined approach, including quality control system. Next, step number two, determining which work of internal audit function to be used. Factors which should be evaluated, work related points, consider nature and scope of work performed and plan to be performed, relevance of this work to external auditor and overall audit strategy and plan, area related points. In these circumstances, we should use less work of internal audit function and we should work more. Areas where more judgment is involved in planning and performing audit procedures, evaluating audit evidence, where there is higher risk of material misstatements and significant risks. In such a case, we need to work more instead of relying the work on internal auditor related points. In these circumstances, we should use less work of internal audit function and we should work more. Less objectivity because of organizational status, policies and procedures related to internal audit function. Lower level of competence. In these cases, we need to work more instead of relying on internal audit function. Next, principle of sufficient involvement and significant judgment. External auditor should always ensure that he is sufficiently involved in doing audit and expressing opinion. All the significant judgment of audit to be made by external auditor. Communication to those charged with the governance. While communicating to those charged with the governance under SA 260 regarding plan and scope of audit, external auditor should communicate how they plan to use the work of internal auditor. Examples where external auditor has to make significant judgments while evaluating going concern assumption, while assessing risk of material misstatements, while evaluating matters affecting audit report, while evaluating the adequacy of disclosure in financial statements, while evaluating significant accounting estimates, while evaluating sufficiency of test performed. In all these cases, external auditor has to make significant judgments. Examples of work done by internal audit function which can be used by external auditor. Law related, testing compliance with regulatory requirements, testing of operating effectiveness of control. Substantive procedures related, hint is Jain. Substantive procedures where a limited judgment is involved. J judgment. A audit trial. Tracing transactions, that is audit trial through information system. I observation of inventory counting. N performing audit or review on non-significant component and non-significant component. J judgment, A audit trial, I inventory and non-significant component. Next, step number 3, using work of internal audit function. Discussion and coordination. External auditor should discuss planned work, use of work with internal auditor and establish coordination between their activities. Read report. External auditor should read report and understand nature, timing, and extent of audit procedures performed by internal auditor and related findings. Perform audit procedures on body of work files. Perform audit procedures to ensure following: work was properly planned, performed, supervised, reviewed, reported, and documented. Sufficient and appropriate audit evidence was obtained. Conclusions are appropriate as per evidence available. Factors affecting nature and extent of external audit procedures on internal auditors' work. Area related points, same as previous step. Next, internal auditor related points, same as previous step. Mandatory reperformance. External auditor shall mandatorily reperform some of the work. External auditor shall mandatorily reperform some of the work. Evaluating external auditor's own conclusion, whether conclusion formed by external auditor in step 1 or step 2, whether they are appropriate or not, need to be decided. Next, taking direct assistance. Another step number 1, evaluate whether internal auditor can be appointed to take direct assistance. If we compare with this step 1 given earlier, one additional point regarding law prohibition is included and one point regarding systematic and disciplined approach is removed because it is not relevant. Auditor has to evaluate following points. Law prohibition. Check whether taking direct assistance is prohibited by law. Evaluate significance of threat. Objectivity of internal auditor. Also inquire into rights, interest, relationship of internal auditor which may create threat with respect to level of competence. Don't take direct assistance in following case: if there is significant threat to objectivity, if level of competence is not appropriate for the proposed assignment. Step number 2, determine nature and extent of work that can be assigned to the internal auditor. Area related points, same as step number 2 earlier. Internal auditor related points, same as step number 2 earlier. External auditor shall not use internal auditor in following procedures: in case of making significant judgments in audit, if work already done or will be done and reported to management or those charged with the governance, relates to higher risk of material misstatements, where judgment is required in performing audit procedures and evaluating audit evidence. Work relates to decisions external auditor makes in accordance with this essay regarding internal audit function and use of its work and direct assistance. Next, communication with those charged with the governance. Doing communication with those charged with the governance as per SA 260, external auditor should communicate nature and extent of direct assistance which will be given by internal auditor and ensure that it should not be excessive. Principle of sufficient involvement. External auditor shall evaluate whether in aggregate he is sufficiently involved in performing the audit and it is his sole responsibility to express his opinion. Step number 3, taking direct assistance from internal auditor. Two agreements shall be taken. A written agreement from entity. Internal auditor will be allowed to follow instructions and will not intervene in work of internal auditor. This is the written agreement that should be taken. Written agreement from internal auditor will keep confidential specific matters, inform external auditor of any threat to their objectivity. External auditor shall provide DSR or DRS, D, direction, supervision, review of work of internal auditor as per SA 220. Also consider IAS, nature, timing, extent of DRS shall be framed taking into consideration that internal auditor are not independent and also consider area related and internal auditor related points. Indications. Also consider whether there are indications suggesting that internal audit function is not appropriate as per step number 1. Audit evidence. External auditor shall check back work performed to underlying audit evidence. External auditor shall evaluate whether audit evidence is sufficient to draw conclusion from internal audit work. DRS should be as per SA 220. Can direct assistance from internal auditor in case of external confirmation procedures can be taken as per SA 610 in determining the nature of work, that may be assigned to internal auditor. External auditor is careful to limit such work to those areas that would be appropriate to assign. As per SA 505, external auditor is required to maintain control over external confirmation request and evaluate the results of external confirmation procedures. It would not be appropriate to assign this to internal auditor. However, internal auditor may assist in assembling information necessary for external auditor to resolve exceptions in confirmation responses.